Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our program tonight, The Educator's Guide to LGBTQ plus Inclusion, a Conversation. And tonight we're going to have two teachers from our local middle school, the Princeton Unified Middle School, in conversation with author Kryss Shane, talking about a very important topic for not just educators, but for parents, social workers, parents, anybody who has children in their lives that they love, to make sure that they feel included, and what schools can do, especially for our LGBTQ plus students. It's all of our jobs to do this. I'm very pleased to be doing this program tonight in conjunction with our youth services staff, who are also here, and thank you for their support. So the story is that I met Kryss Shane, who's our guest author tonight, on Twitter, and we struck up a friendship, and that is how she came here to be with us tonight at the library, and I'm so glad that we did. This is LGBT History Month, if you're not aware. And so this kind of ties in beautifully because, as we all know, that having curriculum that includes our LGBT heroes and people of the past is really important. And so it's specifically why we chose to do this in the month of October. So without further ado, I'm going to do a few housekeeping things while we let everybody sign on. I'm just kind of biding some time. We're building up our audience here. So here on Crowdcast, a few things to know is the chat is open right now, but I'm going to close it down during the main portion of the evening, but we'll open it up again during the Q&A. But if you do have a question that you would like to ask anybody on the screen, there is an Ask a Question button there right at the bottom. You can pop your question right in there. You can see what other people are asking and upvote their questions. If you want to see it, go to the top of the list, and I'll come back on at the end to moderate those questions. If you're having any technical help, right underneath where it says live, so we're live about 2 minutes now, there is a little link that says get audio video help, and or you can just pop it right into the chat right now, as we have other staff online who can help you if you're having any technical difficulties with us right now. So what I like to do is right now is introduce our speakers, and then I'll bring them on screen. So first up is Thomas Foley, him, who is a school counselor at Princeton Unified Middle School, where he co-advises the school's Sexuality and Gender Alliance and leads professional development related to creating inclusive classrooms for students in the LGBTQIA+ community. He holds a certificate in LGBT health education and social services from NYU and is in his third year as a school counselor. He'll be joined by his colleague, Jen Simon, her, who is the co-advisor of SAGA, again, Sexuality and Gender Alliance, which is a GSA. Most people are used to hearing it as GSA, but SAGA is another term for that, who also teaches at Princeton Unified Middle School, where she and Thomas also teach the professional development together on creating inclusive classrooms. She has taught special education, science, and social studies at the Princeton Unified Middle School for 11 years. And they will be joined by our author, Kryss Shane, her, who was named by the New York Times and many other national and international platforms as America's go-to leading LGBT expert. She holds an MS, an MSW, an LSW, and LMSW, and 25 years plus of experience guiding the world's top leaders in business, education, and community via individual, small group, and full staff trainings. And I think I forgot to introduce myself at the beginning. I'm Janie Herman, and I do the public programs here at the library, along with many others on our library staff team. So now, without further ado, I am going to bring up our guests and let them take over the conversation about building inclusive schools for the LGBTQ plus community. So here is Mr. Thomas Foley. Let me unmute you. There we go. He's saying hello.
Hello.
And here is Jen Simon. Uh-oh.
Is that me?
That's you. Okay, so we were just in the green room and everything was perfect. And here is Kryss Shane. We're gonna bring her up. Okay. You have to just love Crowdcast. Jen, do you want to try one more time? Do you have two windows open possibly? If you have two windows of Crowdcast.
Just the one.
Open. Okay, oops, it disappeared.
We're good now.
We're good now, yay.
Yay.
Okay, so I'm going to disappear and let this wonderful crew take over the conversation. I know they have a lot to discuss and share with you.
I get to be in the middle?
Look
This
at
is the
you.
best sandwich ever.
This is awesome. Well, hello. It's so nice to meet you. Everybody, for those of you that don't know, we just met about 15 minutes ago on here. So it's awesome to be here with you.
An exciting evening, and it's so great to see so many people have come. They're already talking in the chat about how this works for teachers and social workers. We've seen mentions of administrators. Somebody mentioned extracurricular activity leaders. Somebody else mentioned parents and community leaders. So everyone's got the right idea of what's got us all together and how this can help everybody.
Absolutely. So I was able to get a copy. Actually, Jen gave me a copy. Gifted me a copy.
I got one too.
I have one.
And I think, I mean, the thing that really stands out to me about this is that it is more than just a book. It's a tool. Like, it is a workbook. It is something that you can go through. You can really assess your own knowledge, your own experience, and where did that decision come from? Like, why did you decide to do it that way?
It's so against my nature as a reader. I'm very much one of those people that I never wrote, like, this book belongs to in it. I never understood as a kid the people who dog-eared the pages on the corner. That was just one of the, to me as a purist, I just thought it was just sacrilegious. And when I started working on this, I kept thinking, the reality is people now read in different ways than they used to. And it's not as common for someone to spend an hour with a pen sitting somewhere because we have technology. And there's so much great stuff on TV, but almost more important, there's so much great garbage on television that it just becomes so easy to plan to watch one episode of 90 Day Fiance and somehow 4 days of your life is gone and you're not sure what happened or whether anyone's fed the dog. And the thought, or maybe it's just me, I don't know. And so my thought became, right, how does this become the most useful? Because we know, and I certainly don't have to talk to the two of you on this one, educators are busy. And there's not always time to have separate paper and you make notes and then you have to remember where you put the notes. And if the book gets borrowed by somebody, do you get it back? Were the notes inside? All those sorts of details just felt not so user-friendly. So it was intentionally created with extra margin space. The middle section, which is very, very much a workbook, was set up and formatted for room in the margins, for room of you can't see the answers to the questions being asked or the guidance until you turn the page, because it's too easy on our brains if the answer's right there to not just look at the answer and think we know something. So it was always created with that awareness. And there were some great educators that were involved as I was writing that I was checking. I know what works in theory. Can you tell me if this works in practice? Is there something here? Because we have great materials, but sometimes the materials say, okay, for your class, this is a great thing. It requires $700 of supplies and 6.5 hours of prep work. And you're like, that sounds great. That's not real life. So this was always intended to really be focused on what's real life and what can be done, whether you work on the janitorial staff where you might not feel like you have much power, or the superintendent of the school where maybe it feels like a lot of pressure that everything comes on you and you have everyone emailing if you've made a choice they don't agree with.
Yeah, I really liked in that middle section how you asked, like, if you're the sole decision maker at your school, what would you do? And then, like, in your current position, what can you do? And I think it was really helpful to help me figure out, like, what was in my control.
Well, and it's really hard to be somebody whose heart knows something and who sees something with their students, but feels like I see it, but I can scream into a void and it doesn't make any difference. And some of that, and also because I have a background both in education and in social work, some of that is like, where can we find empowerment? Where can we be in a position? Sometimes it's where's your position of privilege in any situation? And some of it is, what do you have, especially because in a school setting, when you're a grown-up, or at least that's, chronologically the age you're supposed to be a grown-up. I still would like a juice box and a nap every afternoon. Not gonna lie, I just need a carpet square and some graham crackers. Right, but there's something about forgetting sometimes that, like, oh, someone in this room should do something. Oh, wait, it's me. I'm supposed to be the one doing something. I'm the grown-up here. That there's power even in that. Even if you think you're just the person with the broom, you're still the grown-up in the room of a group of students, and you have inherent power in that. So always really being mindful of where is my power and where do I have power that I didn't realize I had until I started to think about it.
That's so valuable, and it relates directly to, you know, as we were talking in the chat before, and you were interacting with our guests. Everybody, doesn't matter who you are, everybody, every stakeholder in the community, every person who interacts with anybody else can benefit from this material, this knowledge, this work, because it's always work. You're always doing work, and you're not doing it right if you're not always doing work in terms of, you know, continuing to learn. So I love the way you've highlighted that. You mentioned consulting educators in your writing, and I guess I'm personally curious, you know, from what walks of life these educators were, and what other materials did you use to compile, you know, your information and base your questions in your workbook format off of?
Goodness. So I grew up in a bunch of different places, and I've lived all over the country. And in addition to that, I've been teaching and training all over the country. And it's given me this fantastic ability to hear from the parents and the teachers and all the different stakeholders in different places. What are the things that works for them? What are the times in some, like if I'm speaking in New York City, if we start something with let's define the terms, I can go through the definition of LGBT. I can go through most of the things in the plus category pretty quickly in New York City. Same thing in San Francisco. Mostly the same in Fort Lauderdale. But I can be in Mississippi and we can spend 45 minutes talking about what the word gay means. Not because people in Mississippi are not as intelligent or not as open or not as willing. It's just a very, very different world. And our country is so much bigger than most other countries in the world that we have this variety of experience, whether it's related to inclusion and knowledge, whether it's related to how we're handling COVID. It's really taking a look at first, what's it like in different places? And then what's it like when you're boots on the ground doing the work? Because there's a lot that works really well in theory. And that I can tell you, well, best practices of this journal article say this, but if you're the ones in the classroom and you're the ones with students, me saying to you that best practice says that you should immediately stop what you're doing, sit down with that one-on-one child, have a whole 20-minute conversation and talk through their feelings. It's great for a journal article. It's not realistic when you've got, 28 kids in your classroom and it's the middle of the day and the student comes out to you because they want an excuse to go to the bathroom and go visit with their friends. That's not really something that will work in real life. And so as I was writing, I had a handful of educators that I was at different grade levels in different areas of the country where I would send them things and I'd say to them, I need your thoughts on this. And I need you to be really brutally honest with me. And there were a few times that I had what in my head, in my living room, in my audience of one plus my dog was like, the greatest, most brilliant idea that ever happened ever in the history of the universe. And then I sent it to some educators and people were like, you're adorable. No, none of that would work here, but that could be really cool to publish about. And it had to be. I have a file of I had thoughts that needed to go somewhere, but not here. And when I started looking at how do people learn, what are we teaching our kids how to learn, and how does it work at the collegiate level for student teaching? What does that look like when we're busy and juggling students and lesson plans and their staff meetings and parent-teacher conferences and all of these things? Where are we writing our notes down? How are the books being used? The spine is rainbow tie-dye colored, partially because I'm obsessed. If you go to my website, you will see all of the rainbow tie-dye. It's on my LinkedIn page. It's on my business cards. It's on my person. It's just sort of ubiquitous for me. But a lot of that is largely, if you've got a whole bunch of books that look the same on your shelf and a minute and a half to find the right book and flip to the page, I wanted it to be something that stood out because all of our time is super limited. So any ideas for me had to be either free or cheap. They had to be something that worked if you had 5 students in your class or 35 students in your class. They had to work in rural or urban or suburban communities, and I just kept narrowing down. And then I went through people in my social work background and took a look at, does this work? If somebody was in a classroom like this and then became your client, does this work for this group of people? And I went to administrators. It was sort of does this work for y'all? And does this work for the people, I was talking to people in cafeteria staff. I was talking with people I knew who were now retired bus drivers, of what do all of these areas look like? What does it look like for the communities where there are still crossing guards? What does it look like for the school librarian who has not a classroom of 20 or 30, but an entire school and maybe there's only one librarian? What does it look like for the school counselor where there's one social worker or counselor and they move between 700 bajillion different schools in their district? And the more I pieced together what wasn't working and what was, the more it sort of honed in on things. But it was also the realization that some of this couldn't just be me. And so in the appendices of the book is an interview with the parents of transgender youth, which is a giant underground, incredible group of parents whose children are trans identified. And the leaders of that group took a look at things to make sure it was not only right for their own individual children, but that it worked for what collectively the group of allies and activists had been working towards. And I looked at the suicide prevention piece. And one of the co-founders of the Trevor Project, I reached out to and said, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts. And I crossed my fingers he might endorse it. And instead he said, and this is a direct quote, "Thank you for creating something the world needs." And I cried. And I am an unmarried person. I've never been married. And I said to him in an email back, I'm so sad for my future husband who will never say anything as meaningful to me as what you just said. And
that would be hard to top.
Right? Like I got nothing. At that point, I was like, okay, my life is over. There's nowhere to go but down from here. But it was his piece of doing the suicide prevention work. And I reached out to the American Association of Suicidology to make sure I was getting the self-harm and the suicide piece right by them. And they were able then to use all their knowledge base to contribute. And then the only piece that was missing was who writes the forward? Who's the one voice that can speak for all of these kids and all of these educators? And the answer is there isn't one. And so I got incredibly lucky that the founder of Post Secret, when I started to speak with him, and he has worked with Post Secret raising millions of dollars for suicide prevention and lifelines. And he was so gracious in contributing some secrets. And that then became, this isn't just the secret of one person. This isn't just one person's story. We all know from Post Secret existing for so many years, any one person's secret is the secret of many. And so every one of those secrets isn't just one person in one place who wrote a secret. We know it represents people in many places with many experiences, and it's their secret. So collectively, as the whole piece came together, my name is on the cover of it, but it's really all of those voices and all of those people for so many decades and generations of the work they've put in, which is why in the opening of the book, there is in the acknowledgements of Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson and Chief Justice, or well, she wasn't Chief, but Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I was born on her 50th birthday. We shared a birthday, which I have long said, no matter what I do, the coolest thing about me is that I share a birthday with that woman. And looking at what all of that is, and I submitted the manuscript, as I put in the book, on the 50th anniversary to the hour of the Stonewall riot beginning. Because as much as this is for now and for the future, it's very, very much rooted in the voices of the people who have been doing this work for decades and generations.
Wow. It is inspiring and cool to hear you talk about how collaborative of a process this is. And also you beat me to my next question, which is going to be like, what was the coolest thing that has happened in result of this? You've already told us. That is the coolest thing.
Oh gosh, personally, maybe the coolest thing. So I thanked a number of the K through 12 educators that were my teachers when I was a kid. And I'd had this plan that I was going to, when the book came out, I was going to go to my elementary school in middle of nowhere, Ohio. And I was going to have a coffee with each of the people that were named. And I was going to sit down. And it's been, cough, cough, number of years since I was their student. And tell them, like, I just wanted to thank you, and very specific details of things they did that I remember that probably they didn't think twice about in the moment. And then be able to say to them, and because of that, I wanted you to know, and hand it to them and have their name. Like, I so wanted that moment, because I don't think educators ever have any clue the impact that they have. I don't think, sometimes people give y'all like nice notes, but it's like the end of the school year. So it's great. Thanks so much for what you've done in the past year, which is fantastic. If you're a parent and you're listening, please do that. Our educators need to know this. But often what happens is that life goes on and y'all stay up late at night and wonder about us, and you worry about it, and you notice who didn't have lunch in their, packed with them, and who shows up where they're a little smelly, and you wonder if they couldn't bathe because something was going on at home. And you see all of these things, but you don't ever know what happens next. And to be somebody who had the absolute privilege to be able to say, you wondered what would happen next. There's a lot of steps, probably you don't need to know the details, but cough, cough, decades and decades, number of years later, here's what happened next for one of your students. That for me, just from a human perspective, was the coolest thing. Professionally, I don't know that I have the answer yet. This came out at the beginning of COVID. And right now our educators unfortunately have to be so focused on, are you ready to perform your class material in 37 different ways, using 784 different lesson plans, all of which you have to know how to do simultaneously. While you may have kids at home, you also have to be homeschooling. And there's other things, and also continuing ed credits are due soon. There's not really a space, especially as we're talking racial justice, which we so desperately have to talk about, and the elections and our importance of our voices and our votes. I think as things sort of plateau at some point, we'll be able to have more conversation. Maybe we'll find out, maybe I'll get lucky that someday somebody will tell me that this book was on a teacher's shelf and they saw it. Sometimes, as much as we all want to get it right every time immediately, sometimes just trying, even if you get it miserably wrong the first 5 times, lets a kid see my teacher cared enough to try. They didn't always get my pronouns right, but they kept asking. And when they got it wrong, they acknowledged and they apologized. And I just felt like they saw me. Sometimes it's that. Sometimes that's all it needs to be for somebody to feel seen, especially if it's not so safe for them in their home or in their community or with what they're seeing politically on television.
Yeah, I to what you're saying, I imagine you have a similar experience with many different people, with all the people you've worked with. But I know when Jen and I, lead our sessions, we always kind of preface and give a disclaimer, and then throughout tell people you're going to get things wrong, you're going to mess up, it's okay, because as we were talking about before, it's constant work. So I guess like what more could you speak to about people who do get it wrong sometimes?
I think it's fantastic when somebody gets it wrong, because I mean, right? Like nobody says that, and that just sounds ridiculous, but it means that you're trying, and it means that you keep making the effort. If you don't ever try, that's where the problem really is. Or if you're so sure you know everything that you don't make more effort, that's a problem for everyone around you. But if you're trying, if you're, sort of, now that we're in World Series time, if you're swinging for the fences, even when you're missing sometimes you get it right. And there's something great about students not only seeing when you do it right, because modeling behavior is really important, but part of the modeling is when you get it wrong. So often, especially the very best teachers have been doing this for a while. They're the best because they've been doing this a while. They've got the lesson plan figured out. They know every trick that every student tries to pull, every excuse, everything. They're already on top of the garbage you're going to try and sell them on and why you didn't do your homework. They've got it all down. But what it means for a student is sometimes they only ever see the very best version of their teacher, which is great, but it doesn't teach them how to behave and how to handle it when they're not at their best. So when somebody tries and they get it wrong, it's really, really great for kids because they get to see what you do when you realize you've gotten it wrong. Or if you don't know you got it wrong and somebody is kind enough and brave enough to tell you, they get to see what you do then, right? Like they get to see if somebody corrects you, do you become angry and then you never try again? Is that the way that we handle when you try something new and it doesn't work the first time? Are you gracious about it? Do you still try again? What are you doing when you're given new knowledge? There is something really nice about watching that and knowing. I mean, I was a student teacher, and a solid amount of the first months of being a student teacher, I was in my mind, a great student teacher, because we all think we are. But what I was doing was basically role playing every teacher I ever had in my interpretation of those teachers. I was a social work intern at one point. It was at the time a show called Judging Amy was on that had Tyne Daly playing a social worker. I legitimately thought I was a fantastic social worker, like the greatest social worker that ever existed from day one of my internship. I was so convinced. And then later on, I realized all I was doing was pretending I was Tyne Daly's character the whole time. Like, I was so not checked in. I was not right at all. Any teacher that's ever been on a TV show, I was basically just pretending I was that teacher. And, you know, I think that that's always the interesting piece of when does that work? And when do you fall on your face? And it's great for everybody to see you go, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I will get it right the next time. And write a note down for yourself if you have to. Write it in the grade book that the person who says in the grade book their name is John actually is Jennifer. And remembering to put that when you have a substitute teacher and they get the class roster, making sure that wherever that comes from generates that that person's name says John, they're actually Jennifer. Writing something down if somebody uses they, them pronouns, even though they may appear male or appear female, so that the substitute teacher comes in and doesn't think the kids are playing a trick on them and makes a whole big scene out of something. And that happens, not because the substitute knew that they were stepping in it. They were just not set up for that success. That student was not set up for that success. So the more that we keep trying and the more that it's work, but the whole goal is, how do we make our students feel important and loved and accepted? Which isn't new work. It's what we do from the first day we're in teacher or social work training. It's what we're doing in our internships and in our student teaching. It's what we're evaluated on. It's what our continuing ed credits are on. It's not any different. It's what we've consistently been doing. We're just adding an additional component to how we're doing that.
It's so comforting to hear you embrace mistakes like that, because I think it's important to have that perspective, because we all mess up. And one of the things that I've noticed with my students, you know, Jen and I run the Sexuality and Gender Alliance at our middle school. We have a great number of students that participate, and it's really comforting and cool. And many of them identify as a part of the community, and many of them identify as allies, and many of them openly acknowledge, I have no clue, which is great that they have that space to say that I have no clue and then learn more about themselves. But one of the things we hear from them so often is that it doesn't matter if a teacher makes a mistake so long as they try. And, you know, Jen and I try and shout that from the loudspeakers and let teachers know that this is how the students are thinking and feeling and telling us. And I think that it's awesome to hear it from somebody who's done the work and done the research and done the outreach. Really, really just cool to see. One of the things that you mention is that substitute rosters, or fixing your rosters, or making sure you acknowledge you have the right names and pronouns. And I know that a lot of the work, a lot of what you do in this book really speaks to what individuals can do personally to kind of enhance their understanding and enhance their own, just acceptance and inclusion of people. But a lot of the times it seems daunting, you know, when we think about the big picture. What words of encouragement do you have to people like me who I do the little bit of work every day I can, I do the little things, and I'm working towards the bigger things, but sometimes it feels like an uphill battle?
I think that's fair. I think we're all, for the most part, as a human population, I genuinely believe we're all doing the best we can all the time. And sometimes we're the person who is cursing in the car because we got cut off on the highway. And sometimes we're the person who was changing the radio station and thinking about the 37 things we have to do, and we accidentally cut somebody off on the highway. We're kind of, it's that whole idea of sometimes you're the windshield and sometimes you're the fly. The number of now Mike Pence jokes that could be told in this space, if we all just collectively agree to think them, we don't have to say them all, but we're all thinking. I think a lot of it is realizing everybody's got sort of work to do and things to learn. We're now in a social justice time where we're talking more than ever about Black Lives Matter and about systemic racism and oppression. And I mean, I've been doing this work within the LGBT plus population for 26, 27 years or so now. So this one I've got really well down pat. I can do a lot of this in my sleep. I actually have dreams in which I am doing this. So that happens. But I know when it comes to the racial component as a white person, there's a lot I don't know. And it's not up to, because white people caused racism, it's up to white people to solve and correct for racism. As much as there need to be spaces that are sacred and protected for marginalized communities to speak openly without having to worry about the feelings of the majority, it's the majority's job to figure out how we can do better. And we're lucky that we now have the internet. We're lucky we have access to books, and local bookstores now need us more than ever to be buying books from them, to reach out to your local bookstores to figure out what are the books, if I'm a white person, to learn about Black issues or Black history. Who are the people writing about Indigenous cultures? What's going on when I don't know about the experience of a gay man or a transgender teenager? What can I watch on TV? What are the documentaries on these topics? It's all there. All we've got to do is go get it. And a lot of the time it feels overwhelming because it feels like it's this whole piece of, I never considered this whole category, and I'm going to screw everything up, and then I'm going to get fired from my job, and cancel culture on the internet, and something I saw about special snowflakes, and I'm so afraid to get it wrong, I don't want to try, which feels a lot of feelings. And the feelings aren't wrong, because feelings can't be wrong, they just are. But once you kind of get to the other side of all of the feeling part, it's just starting somewhere. And a lot of the work here isn't any different than any other population or group. For example, one of the things that we talk about a lot is asking somebody's name, because we know with transgender people, that's really important. But if we take away the transgender piece of this for a moment, we do this all the time. We know that if somebody shows up and there's a name tag, that we ask about that. We did this in the green room before we started. Thomas showed up and the question was, are you Tom or Thomas? Nothing about that was weird. Nothing about that stopped the entire universe and people fell off because gravity wasn't there anymore. It was just like, oh, okay, I just didn't know what to call you. Now you've told me, now I know. I'm a person who has legally 2 first names and no middle name. And also my last name is some people's first names. So it gets messed with all the time. And I don't go by my legal first name, which is 2 names. If you yelled that to me across a parking lot somewhere, I wouldn't turn around. It's just not a name I identify with. It's not what I've gone by for a long time. So I'm often having conversations with people of, this is what it says on when I'm logged into something as an educator, and it has my full name. The name I actually use is this, which is fantastic. It gives somebody the opportunity to call me by my actual name. It means if they see me in public and they yell across the parking lot, they're yelling the name that will actually make me turn around. We do that if somebody is named Elizabeth. We don't assume they go by Elizabeth. We typically will ask, is it Elizabeth? Is it Liz? Is it Beth? Is it Lizzie? We do that. We know that someone named John might go by Jack, and someone, named James might go by Jim, all those sorts of things. So when we're doing that all the time for everybody, the only difference is that somebody's name might say John and they might go by Jennifer. And we might have a moment of like, oh, that was unexpected. You just don't say that part out loud. You just write in your grade book, or you write on your sports team roster, or you make a note in your phone. If you've got parents in your, if you're a parent group and you've got classmates of students and everybody's getting to know each other, or the PTA sorts of things, you can make a note somewhere. You can write down just as easily as when mostly it's women that will change their name when they get married, or perhaps change their name when they get divorced. If you can remember to make that change, you can remember that the person who's listed as John is actually Jennifer. It's not any different than what we already do. It's just expanding that it's a thing we already do.
100%.
So Kryss, I was wondering when I was reading it, obviously you wrote the book, you didn't know what school would look like right now. Do you have any special advice for teachers who are teaching virtually and remotely, and how they can make sure that they're connecting with their students?
Sure. So yeah, I definitely had no idea when the book was being written. I really, really wish I had, because either I would have been locked up somewhere because no one would have believed me if I would have tried to tell everybody this, or I would have had so much PPE to give away to people because I'd have been stockpiling for months and years beforehand. It would have just seemed bizarre to everyone, but I would have been totally, and toilet paper. I could have dug forts with all the toilet paper I would have pre-bought. But I think a lot of it is that we're finding that in some cases, if the home is really inclusive and supportive, this time is sometimes great for our students. Our transgender students, where they're not safe in bathrooms, suddenly don't have to worry about going to the bathroom at school. The students that might need extra time on something can read a little bit slower because the class doesn't move on if they're doing asynchronous schooling. All these sorts of things are working out really well. The trickier part is if the home isn't safe. And so when we're working with our students now, we have to always let them know, by being as inclusive as possible, by having sorts of background images. When we look at Jen's background, if you don't mind me to call you out in the moment, we see that there is something that's back there, right? Not likely set up just for this moment, but back there that has a rainbow flag, that's an inclusive with a trans flag, that has black and brown colors for people who are black and brown and also LGBT identified. And it says on it, you are perfect. So if I'm a student, even if I'm in the first day of Ms. Simon's class and I tune in, I already know that this is a place where I'm not going to get treated badly because of who I am. Even if when the computer is off, the people in my household aren't kind to me because of who I am. And the more that we're mindful, we're all looking at Zooms now and all these different platforms and looking at what does our background look like. And we're trying to move it, right? Like I closed the closet doors behind me so no one had to see the stuff in the closet. And we're looking at how many, I have 700 lights on around me. It's like noon in Times Square right now to get the lighting kind of right. And we're getting the microphones set up. I pretty regularly use a headset mic. So I kind of rock the Garth Brooks look, which I'm fine with. I love him. But we're doing all these things. What we can also be doing is being mindful that what's in our background is giving signals to the people who are looking at us what's okay. So it's not just LGBT inclusion. It's recognizing that, as I go back and call her out again, that in Ms. Simon's space, there's a Black Lives Matter sticker that's there. So it not only tells the Black students that they matter enough that she put something up intentionally to indicate that. But if I've met her for the first time, and this is obviously something that I'm very, very passionate about, I automatically know before she says a word, we can have conversations where I don't have to worry that I will be attacked for my beliefs or my values or my sense of humanity, because there's already those signals that are up. So even just looking at what's going on, what do we have in the background? If we are in Mr. Foley's classroom and there's a rainbow flag back there in a window space, right? It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be that every sentence is, yay, gay people. So today in math class, we're going to be learning about the quadratic formula, also yay for gay people.
With me, it's often that with me, but.
Right? But there is this belief often that it has to be this whole idea of, okay, so today we're only going to talk to gay people. Everyone else is allowed in the room, but really this is just for you. Every transgender student automatically gets an A. You don't have to learn anything or do anything, but I inherently think you're awesome, so A is for you. I have candy for everybody, but by everybody, I only mean the Black students. Anybody who is in a wheelchair automatically gets, that's not real life. Nobody's being taught you only get things if you are in a marginalized community. We're simply acknowledging that a piece of who somebody is doesn't have to be removed because they've shown up to learn. And we've also found that a lot of what happens is that as great as this is for our LGBT plus kids, it's equally great or maybe even better than great for the people who don't fit. If you happen to be raising, for example, a white male student who is cisgender, which that word is the opposite of transgender, if they are heterosexual, that kid automatically has all sorts of access to things in America that other people don't, especially if they are neurotypical, if they don't have any physical limitations, all those aspects. If they don't have learning disabilities, they're getting the very best world experience. The ones that are classically attractive have it that much easier. And they don't know, because kids only know exactly what it is that you let them know. So I have friends who have a son who has been the cutest kid ever, literally since birth. Like, people stop them on the street, want to put them in commercials. If he goes into the grocery store, the grocer actually shows up and gives him a free cookie. And I used to tell them, you got to be careful, because this kid could grow up to be a monster if you're not careful. Not because it's an inherently bad child, but because that's not going to be a kid that naturally experiences any sort of adversity. And luckily for the whole world, this is the child of two educators. So this is a child who's been brought to protests and talked about, donating the toys you don't play with anymore, and what it means when somebody has two mommies or two daddies. And that's inherent now in this child. So while this child keeps growing up, he's almost 9 now, it's not weird. There's nothing wrong to this child if they make a new friend at school and the friend has two mommies. There's nothing about that that's weird. But this child also doesn't think he's inherently better than anybody else, or that anybody else is inherently lesser than he is, which we see in our books, right? Like, if your textbooks always say straight white men did everything for this country, everything good in America was done by straight white men. It makes sense that if you're a straight white man, you grow up thinking you can rule the world. It also makes sense that if you're a straight white boy, you don't think that your Black classmate or your gay classmate or your classmate in a wheelchair can do all the things that you can do. Not because they're inherently terrible children, they're just not being taught to see the same value. And those kids aren't being taught to see the value and the potential in themselves. So the more that we're mindful, not just of how do we support the gay kids and the trans kids, how do we support Black Lives Matter and the Black kids or the brown kids or the indigenous kids or the kids, in the wheelchairs, all those things that we already know, we know we're doing better for all of the kids when we're teaching them now, not only to notice the differences in people, but to be excited about them, to recognize that what you know that I don't know, when we hang out together, we know more stuff, right? Like, if you have your toys and your toys are cool, and I have my toys and my toys are cool, we don't have to fight about who has cooler toys. If we're best friends, we get to play with twice as many toys, and that's awesome. And if somebody else comes to class and they have totally different toys than us, we don't have to not like them because we have cool toys. We can make friends with them, and now we have 3 times the cool toys we can play with. It's really just for kids all that they need to figure out, and they'll keep growing as they get older and as we keep imparting this at different ages and grade levels and stages. They want to learn from us. We just have to allow them to learn from positive, intentional choices that we make.
Okay. That's really great. I'm going to interrupt back in because I want to make sure we have time. We have some really great questions in our question and answer box. This has been such a wonderful and enlightening discussion, and thank you so much. Actually, our first question that got the most upvotes here for just a minute, and I'll let Kryss take a little bit of a break here and catch her breath, is somebody, we have 2 people that have asked about kind of that tie together. Hearing from Tom and Jen, what are they doing that works at that with someone at that very special, unique middle school level? And also then someone wanted to know if there's something that Tom or Jen think that they might now employ from the book, or that they've already been able to employ this school year having read your book. So these questions are for Tom and Jen, and then we'll get back to you in a minute, Kryss.
Oh, you're muted, Jen.
There we go.
All right. I definitely am going to recommend the book to everybody because I'm keeping my copy because I'm writing notes all over it. But like we were talking about before, I do think that the middle section with the scenarios and then thinking about how with different amounts of privilege you would respond to it. And then when Kryss gives the suggestions, I think that's really one of the better resources that we've seen. And it's more practical than what a lot of what's out there.
Yeah, and I think that, we live in a very special place. Well, you all live in a very special place, those of you in Princeton. I don't live in Princeton, but I work in Princeton, and I work in a very special place. And I think that Jen and I are fortunate to be allowed to do the work we're doing. And, that work we're doing includes the club at the middle school level. We have a club at the high school level. We are initiating clubs at the elementary levels in the next school year. we have turned our single stall restrooms at the middle school into gender neutral spaces because it's a single stall restroom and there's no reason it shouldn't be. We're doing professional development for staff that is now being required of every new staff member that's hired. And as we go throughout this school year, our training that we do, and again, we do a very base level SOGI 101, we call it, sexual orientation, gender identity training, but every staff member will go through that training during this school year. And I think that this is just another wonderful tool that we get to now use. And we can honestly, literally, I'm flagging pages that I'm like, oh, I need to do this question. I need to do this activity. And it is just amazing to personally feel reinforced in the work I'm doing, but also feel reinvigorated because I have this wonderful tool now. Like, honestly, I've never had a book like it where it's a workbook like this, and it's obviously something I'm really passionate about. So thank you, Kryss.
And how old is the club at the middle school that you start?
So it is in its third year. It started with myself, and Jen had been having discussions with the principal prior to me starting. And so when I came in, he was like, you know what? This sounds like a great idea. He introduced us, and it's been magic ever since.
And the kids, how many kids are in the club currently? I mean, I know you're virtual right now. I mean, I guess before we went on lockdown last year, what kinds of things were you and the kids doing?
So we're still meeting virtually every week. Before lockdown, we would also still meet every week. Unfortunately, we were able to have snacks and have some more variety in what we do when we were in person. But via Zoom, we're still able to have wonderful discussions, share wonderful resources. We basically model our club meetings as first, some sort of educational component that leads often to a discussion, which, their middle schoolers then devolves into them being social and crazy, which is always fun because, just for them to have that space and see other kids like them. To answer your question, we have about anywhere between 15 and 25 kids attend every single meeting, and that the kids fluctuate within that number, but we've had over 80 students independently come to our meeting. And Jen and I, we keep the names and numbers in our head in case, because many times these kids reach out to us after they've moved on. We had kids with us in 8th grade 3 years ago that we're still in regular communication with because, still they are not feeling as much love and support as they would want at the high school level. So it's been really cool the impact we've been able to have. We work with the high school GSA. We've worked with the library, which y'all are awesome. We've worked with the Princeton LGBT Center as well. We feel, and I'm speaking for Jen, but I'm saying we feel very lucky to be able to do what we do, to have the support of the community, to have the support of the board, and the wonderful members on the board, to have the support of our current administration. And we plan on continuing to fight this fight and to do this work and to empower others with the knowledge that we are also still working on ourselves, but that we feel, competent in to lead that charge in Princeton. And
then this is going to be going down to the K-5 schools in the district.
That's our hope. Yep.
That's the hope and goal.
Awesome.
We have a plan, and we have a plan that we are submitting to administration, and they've already, verbally told us that we have their support, and so we're gonna do our best to make it happen.
And that's one thing that our students have mentioned is that they're excited that we're starting at the middle school, but that they wished that more people were talking about these issues when they were younger, so that they had that language to be discussing it.
Yeah, because it is often in primary school, 2nd, 3rd grade, that kids might start realizing this about themselves and not have the language yet, or the ability to voice what they're feeling inside. And so I think if they come from a home where this is not discussed or whatever, that is really crucial. Let's go to the next question. Thank you both so much for sharing that. The next question that got the most votes says from somebody, they say they're a middle school teacher and they want to make sure kids know and see them as an ally. But their school is not a place where a rainbow flag can be flown. They do have a GSL, so their school is somewhere in the middle. What suggestions do you have to allow students to see that my classroom is a safe space and I'm an ally for those that need one, that is not as in your face as having a rainbow flag or sticker somewhere? I should add that I'm teaching in person 5 days a week, so looking for how to include these ideals in a traditional classroom setting. Anyone, if you could answer that. So is there some way that you can do this without having that? Why would they not? Okay.
So
I was gonna say, I feel like the two of you on the ground in the classrooms, even though you get to be in this fun Princeton bubble that I just want to live in. I just feel like we should just put the whole world under this iridescent rainbow bubble y'all get to be in. What's worked, I guess, in other schools other than the places that get to be in the iridescent bubble?
Yeah.
One suggestion that I have, depending on how your club is running your school, is seeing if faculty members are allowed to attend. We have some faculty members that attend regularly, but we have lots of other who have just popped in for 1 or 2 meetings, and purely for that, to show the students that they're there and that's supportive. And I think it means a lot to them.
Yeah. Or just even announcing to your class, hey, everybody, remember there's this SAGA club. That might be a great club for you to join. Like verbally saying it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think subtle indicators, are definitely, kids are so observant. And many of the kids who know who they are really hone in on any cue that they see. Sometimes it might be a miscue, but a kid will see it and interpret it a certain way. But I think, I'm not sure what content you teach, but if you're an English teacher, having a book or two in the classroom that, touches the subject and not necessarily has to be the central theme, but that representation will show students that visiting the GSL club that you have at your school is a fantastic idea. And it's just, embracing and expressing your acceptance of anyone, no matter who they might be. Just really emphasizing that acceptance.
I have my dog here. Yeah, I think so. I was just thinking as well in terms of your curriculum, and I don't know where New Jersey is. I know that before lockdown they were trying to get LGBT inclusion in all the curriculum, but even if it's not, if you're in a state that doesn't have that, like for my son, when you get to them, if they have to do like a biography of a famous inventor, make sure you have on that list people who come from the LGBTQ world. Or if you're doing, one year they had to do, in his Spanish class, they had to do a profile for Spanish Hispanic Heritage Month of a famous person of Hispanic heritage. And, make sure you have some people on the list that are LGBTQ. It's a signal that not all of our history is that way, and not all of our history is straight.
Sometimes that can be part of an assignment option too. Looking at, for example, if you teach history, having the students choose resources, one that's written by a white Christian author talking about the Holocaust, and another that's written by a Black author or someone who identifies as Jewish. And what are the facts that we know? And what are the opinions that are included, and what are we looking for? Which also teaches just being discerning as a reader. I've seen people that have had rainbow sneakers. Sometimes I have rainbow tie-dye sneakers that people will notice real quick. But even just something that has a little bit of rainbow somewhere, it's sort of the way that if you buy a red car, you start to notice how many red cars are on the road. There are no more red cars on the road than yesterday before you bought your car. But if you're looking for it, you'll find it. And the kids that need the acceptance the most are looking for the rainbows wherever you can put them. They're looking for the language that's inclusive. Maybe just on the first day of school, when you put your name on the chalkboard, or maybe I'm dating myself now. Everybody has fancy whiteboards and all sorts of things. What am I saying? That maybe next to your name, you put your own pronouns. If you're giving
in your
out
email signature.
Right, in your email signatures, if you're giving out an assignment that your name is on, every place that your name is written, your pronouns are there. If the name is on your door, if it's in some type of format that you can't just redo, maybe you take a piece of masking tape and you write your pronouns next to it, and you just put it up next to it so that every place they see your name, they see your pronouns. Even if you don't feel like you're in a place where you can have every student introduce themselves and give their pronouns, because that might not be where you're ready yet. If you always give yours, the ones who know what it means will know what you're doing. The ones who don't know and want to find out will ask you. And often what happens is that they'll ask you at the beginning of class. And you might not be in a school where you can stand up and volunteer to talk about pronouns, but it's your job as an educator to answer student questions. And darn it, if a student asks you questions about the pronouns you wrote down, well, you don't have a choice. You have to answer the student. And if everyone else is in the room and also hears the answer, accidental, that just happens,
Yeah.
And that becomes its own conversation. That doesn't become anyone accusing you of making giant statements that the school isn't ready for.
That's a really great tip, that having your pronouns everywhere is so important, including in your email file and on your door. Someone in the comments just wanted us to, speaking of our little Princeton bubble, it's a new, our town has a municipal LGBT plus liaison as part of our Human Rights Commission as well, which is, like, I think, pretty unique.
Wow. Very cool.
This is going to be our last question. We have actually so many questions here, and I'm just going with the top ones. And so they want to know from, say, for instance, from Jen and Tom, how do you recommend you approach someone who needs to read a book such as this or other books? You're in the classroom, you're in the hallways, you've witnessed a teacher getting it wrong with a student, but they don't even realize it, and they're not trying to correct it. So how can you politely get them to go? You don't want to let it slide. So how can you politely get that teacher over and let them know, hey, maybe this is something that you need to do? So how can you approach that to your fellow educators?
One thing that we tell the kids a lot when we're talking about how, the adults are going to make mistakes is to assume best intentions, and not that they're doing something to be hurtful, but because they don't know any better. And I think if you come from that point of view, it can cut down on people being defensive, and they're more likely to hear what you're trying to say to them.
Yeah, with adults, it works wonders too. It's like, yes, you're going to get it wrong. The kids know you're going to get it wrong. I see that you care, so I just wanted to let you know. And it is, it's nice to approach that in a gentle way, because this stuff is so important. And so many people who care about this material don't know so much about it. So I think it's always nice to approach it gently, but with that warm, loving embrace that we want them to have for all students. It's nothing confrontational. It's just, hey, let me help you out here. I think that student actually uses this name. You should check out this great book that I have. That kind of thing.
We do that for each other all the time. That's something that's not, when we talk about what's unique about this population, this actually kind of isn't. We know any school, wherever you are, whether you're online or in person, is a group full of people who have been teaching for 15 minutes or 15 years, or, they're a fourth generation educator. We all know stuff other people might not know, and they all know stuff that we don't know. And none of us would survive if every single thing had to be figured out by every single person. So sometimes it is just sort of being like, hey, I'm chronically lost all the time. If you ever see me on the street, don't ever follow me. I walk with purpose. I never know where I'm going, ever. And when I've taught, I've walked the long way places, because once I figured it out once, that's just the way I always went. And there was somebody who was also a teacher who would see it sometimes and be like, hey, it's cool, but really the quicker way to get to the cafeteria, instead of going right and all the way around, if you just go left, it's 2 doors down from where you started from. They didn't mean to be offensive to me. They were just cluing me into something, so I didn't have to spend more of my own effort trying to figure it out myself. It's, hey, do you have a lesson plan for this topic area? Hey, we just started talking about, there was just a protest, and I want to talk about this in my classroom. Does anyone have lesson plans on this? Do you know anything about this topic? Hey, I have a kid whose parent was diagnosed with cancer, and I'm not sure what to do, but somebody else has had that, and they have something. We're all just bringing resources together in general. That's already standard practice most places. This can just add to that. It doesn't have to be, a billboard of you screwed up and I know everything and you know nothing. We all know everything about something and nothing about a lot of things.
That's right. This has been such a great conversation, and I'm so glad that we were able to have it here today and host it here at the library. And I'm looking forward to the days when we can all be back together in person and working together in person and helping to support all of the school children in our school district in this way. We actually had some really big plans for Pride Month this June that we were going to do with the middle school and the high school, and we have our own teen advisory board. Our teen advisory board at the library is so wonderful and so inclusive, and we're very proud of the work that they do as well. They lead the way. We have a very active teen advisory board, and they've taught us as librarians and library staff so much as well. And the children these days can teach the adults as well. And I think that's the important thing, is to sit and listen and to learn from what they have to tell us about what their world is. And so thank you so much for being here tonight and taking time out. I know, especially for, Mr. Foley and Ms. Simon, they've been probably on Zoom all day doing some teaching, or maybe back in school, or doing hybrid. I don't know what you're even doing these days, juggling balls while you're, out on a water ski in the middle of the lake trying to teach. I'm sure it's something along that line.
And something's on fire. There's always juggling things also, right?
Yeah, I mean, I know right now teachers are doing incredible things to keep our students learning and to keep our students safe and to keep our students feeling like they matter. And so I thank you guys for logging on after a long day of Zoom to be our interviewers for Kryss and to take the time to share your experiences of what you've done. And there's my dog toy. I've got my hour. My dog, so I can't stay quiet anymore. And so much. And thank you so much, Kryss, for being here to share what you've learned and this book. And I know that Kryss has already dropped her website into the chat box. Maybe she can just drop it there again if you need to reach out to her. She's also on Twitter. The library is on Twitter at Princeton PL. You can follow us there. And, stay tuned. I think we're going to be doing some more things in the future that will help advance and make all of our students feel included in Princeton and beyond, hopefully. And I think that's it. So let's just everybody go. Good night, everybody. It's always so awkward at the end of these conversations where you say, good night. Okay.
Never awkward, just sad to go.
It is
Have
sad
a great
to
evening,
go.
everybody.
Okay, so I'm going to end broadcast and stay safe out there, everybody, and we will see you soon.